Coming up in this episode...
It's a really good movie.
This movie never really took off.
She doesn't like it because it's just men.
Should have performed better at the box office.
It'd be sheer pedantry.
Should be better regarded.
Splice the main brace, Mr. Mate.
Exactly. And it's great that we're throwing some light on it now. Welcome back to the Historical Movies Podcast. In today's episode, the ship is our home. The ship is England. It's Master and Commander. Bryce, I'm delighted to say for the first time ever in this podcast, we're sitting in the same room.
Yes.
And we're sitting in your kitchen in Liverpool. Great to be here. And great to be here doing an absolutely fantastic film, Master and Commander. I should introduce myself. My name's Ross. I'm an editor. And I'm joined by my brother, Bryce, Professor of Modern History at Liverpool Hope University and historical scriptwriter. Seriously, Bryce, this is an absolutely wonderful movie, one of my favourite movies. And I think the reason why, the historical setting of this movie, so basically set during the Napoleonic period, this Age of Sail conflict. And when I was a kid, I came across, I had a book when I was a kid by a guy called Stephen Beastie, and he did a cross-sections book. And it was like, it cut up a man of war, so a ship of the line, actually bigger than the HMS Surprise we see in this movie. But it cut it up into sections, and I would go through the sections in this book, page by page, and I would look at the illustrations and the drawings, and I was absolutely fascinated by the fact that these people, on a ship that size, it's like 600 people, living in what was, at the time, like the most powerful thing ever created, sailing around, and basically projecting British imperial power across the globe. There's one page in particular I remember, and that was it basically was the combat page. And, you know, when a cannonball hits the side of a wooden ship, it splinters, and it fires all of this horrific wooden little bits of shrapnel into the hold of the ship, and it takes out people. And that might sound a bit bizarre, but from then on, basically, I was completely obsessed by this time period, looking at ships, and the fact that you basically have a little human community on a boat, and it's that human community against the vastness of nature, storms, and against the enemy. And that there's something about that makes for brilliant cinema, breaks for a brilliant story. And it's kind of a shame that this movie, we never got a sequel to this movie. Although it's based on a series of books we'll come on to, there's 20 of them. It kind of makes me sad when I watch this movie, because I think this movie is such a great introduction, such a great vignette of what it would be like to live in that time period, that we never got a sequel. And I think a lot of people listening to this who will be massive Master and Commander fans will also be feeling that it's such a shame that we didn't get a sequel to this movie, because it promises, it gives so much. It gives such a wonderfully rich historic vision that we love talking about on this podcast. And that always kind of strikes... It's almost... And I watch it, it's almost a bit melancholy for me, this film, because it had such great potential to become a series, and they wanted to make a series. But for various reasons, it didn't quite... It didn't quite become... We'll come on to why that is. But how about you, Bryce? I mean, this really is... I think this is a great action movie that's got a lot of humanity in it. And for me, that really elevates this movie above a lot of the stuff that we've done in this podcast. I think it's a wonderful movie. What do you think? Yeah. As I sip my red wine as we're sitting here in your kitchen.
Again, it's the great man's school. It's the great man making great decisions. Russell Crowe.
It makes for great cinema, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a great watch. Do you know, the reason I really like this movie is because it is a male romance. Or bromance.
It's a bromance. It's a bromance film, yeah.
The relationship between the two, so Russell Crowe and his
Maturin,
and it doesn't have to be overly dramatic or homoerotic, or it's just a nice pure
it's a lot
male
of
relationship.
Yeah, what I get from this movie that I love is I'm completely obsessed with this period of history. The Age of Sail, I find it absolutely fascinating. Like, I'm sure a lot of our listeners do. But what makes this movie so good for me is that you get all of this naval action stuff, but at the same time they're clever enough to punctuate it with humanity. There's so many great moments of humanity in this film. I'm thinking like when the kid is stitching up the bag at the end to and there's a shot where he kind of brushes the hair to one side, and there's I'll preempt favorite scene. I think my favorite scene is when Aubrey decides to come to land, despite the fact that he's chasing the French vessel to save his best friend, basically, so that he can be operated on by himself. We'll come on to that later. And it's just a wonderful, and then you have this wonderful encapsulation of that Enlightenment period with the music, and it works so beautifully together. And this kind of friendship that you have between these two men, and that for me, that's where this film is just it really is works magnificently well. I really like it for those parts.
Well, it's very much a boys' movie. It's unashamedly a boys' movie. There's not a lot of women in it.
Yeah.
And
well, it's unlucky, if you have them on the boat.
Yes. Jean-Pierre Nourgrit writes about how this is similar to Tintin. Tintin and the Secret of the Unicorn. And I think it's very good for that, this movie, because it's sort of, there's very few movies which sort of portray that kind of relationship between men, as pure and nice and uncomplicated, really.
Yeah, I think this movie does, it's basically a war movie, but I think it does the intimacy of friendship. It does it better than any war movie I think I've seen. Yeah, I've mentioned that, I wanted to get your opinion. So it's basically set in 1805, this movie. And the book it's mainly based on, Far Side of the World, is actually set later, and they're fighting against the Americans. But it was changed for this movie to be the French, so that it would perform better in America. So they've moved it about 10 years earlier, and it's set in 1805 as Napoleon is taking over Europe. But at the same time as the Age of Enlightenment is happening. And you get that kind of wonderful feeling in this movie of exploration, discovery, scientific endeavor. I'm just wondering if you could speak about that from a historical point of view and what this movie encapsulates.
It captures a lot of these big themes really well, and distills them really well, I think, with the main characters. Because you have, this contrast, don't you, between the captain and his mission, his essentially imperialist mission, and his number two, really, the Doctor, who is there to map the world, to discover, to document.
Yeah, kind of away from any kind of partisan conflicts, basically.
Absolutely.
He's there for science.
Away from nations and nationalism and
all that shit.
Nonsense. Yeah,
Yeah.
And you can feel his frustration, of course, when he's told to pack up and get back on board. This is a man of science. And of course, that speaks to the Enlightenment age in which this is set, which it captures really well. I think it does it really well. It doesn't have to explicitly discuss those big themes. Yeah. But it captures them, I think, fairly well.
So I'm always interested in this. I don't know about you, but I've read all of the C.S. Forester Hornblower series, which is set in the same time period. But Forster was writing at a time slightly earlier than Patrick O'Brian, of course, who wrote all of these books. And it's always interested me. This movie never really took off. It didn't really capture the imagination. And there's a couple of reasons why, and I'll come back to those two authors in a minute. Russell Crowe says it's in an interview recently, he said it's basically down to the poor box office, or relatively poor box office performance that this had in America. It did very well in the rest of the globe. And he also said that, interestingly, Pirates of the Caribbean came out about 4 or 5 months before this movie did. So there's kind of only one space. His theory is there's only space for one big boat movie in the national consciousness. And then Master and Commander, which the filming wrapped before Pirates of the Caribbean. Apparently they had a lot of problems in post-production. And so it ended up coming out much later than Pirates of the Caribbean. And he says that's possibly a reason why this movie never really took off in the way that I think a lot of people who are fans of this movie expected it to, or thought it would do, because it was critically acclaimed. It did very well critically, and sort of mediocre at the box office.
I think one of the reasons perhaps it didn't take off, because it's one of these movies with no women in it.
Yeah. Although actually there is a scene where Jack ogles, I don't think ogles the right word, but he looks at a young native woman.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the only depictions. There's kind of like one of the things I have with this movie is that it's so bristling with ideas that it kind of brings up 2 or 3 different strands which are not fully developed. One of those is that Russell Crowe has this sort of longing look into the eyes of a native woman, almost thinking about, well, what have I sacrificed to be a naval captain? And in some ways, I think maybe this movie, if I was to be ultra critical, would be that to say, well, it's kind of in thematical respects, it's taken on maybe a little bit too much. It's tried to take on a few too many things. It's got this whole Jonah subplot.
That's a very good point. It's trying to encapsulate all the currents of thought of the time. Aubrey is a solid Royal Naval man, a monarchist. Then you've got his number 2, the botanist, who is supposedly an Irish Republican, essentially. Yeah. How much that kind of political opinion would have been tolerated, even within the bounds of, professionalism and science at the time, is somewhat dubious. And yes, it's trying to encapsulate all of those things. Yeah, I accept that criticism. It's probably trying to do a little too much.
We mentioned it previously when we did Mutiny on the Bounty with the wonderful Marlon Brando. We're getting onto the history now. Dr. Johnson, the guy who wrote the dictionary, he said that at the time when this was set, being aboard a naval boat was worse than being in prison, a contemporary prison. Yeah. And I just wanted to get onto that. We talked about the fact that it encapsulates the age so well. Actually, it also encapsulates the experience of being on those Royal Naval ships. And there's a lot of stuff, like the crew visited in Portsmouth. The casting crew visited the HMS Victory. Yeah. They did a lot of stuff to kind of build those bonds together. And it does a really good job of building that kind of environment, I think.
I think it's what I really like about this movie is it's sort of honest portrayal of male friendship, uncomplicated, and a sort of band of brothers thing. In that way, it is a bit sort of propagandaic in some ways. In some ways, you watch this movie, you think this is really sort of quite sort of British propaganda kind of piece, but
it's an Australian lead and an Australian director.
Yeah. And I actually think it strikes me, for all my issues with the British Empire in that period, as quite faithful actually in its representation, quite honest, quite uncomplicated, quite there's a trueness to this movie, which is really nice. It's quite refreshing actually. Yeah, to watch this kind of movie.
And it's an uncynical movie, and I think
absolutely uncynical. And at the same time, I don't think it sort of elevates the British Empire. I think it shows.
Well, it's not really that interested in it because we're on the far side of the world. We're away from the the Napoleonic conflict. Napoleon had taken over Europe at this, a lot of Europe. Yeah. And we're away from that theatre, aren't we? We're way over in South America, basically, for most of this movie. I just want to come on to some of the... we must mention Thomas Cochrane, who is the real inspiration for Jack Aubrey and also Horatio Hornblower, a guy who's... we haven't got time in this podcast. We maybe do a separate podcast about his career because this stuff is ridiculous. A sea captain at the time during the Napoleonic conflict, many exploits of which have become legendary and provide the background for these books. Nicknamed the Sea Wolf by Napoleon Bonaparte, but he was famous for disguising ships and using wonderful seamanship to defeat stronger enemies and defying orders. I've got some highlights of his life here, Bryce. Mm-hmm. Court-martialed for being flippant to a first lieutenant. That's early in his career. Got into a duel with a French royalist officer after an altercation at a fancy dress party. And fought a battle in his dressing gown, one of his many things. And was kicked out of the country because of a stock market scandal.
Hold on, man.
In 1814, there was basically a rush on the London Stock Exchange due to fabricated rumours that Napoleon Bonaparte had died, which sent the London Stock Exchange soaring. And that was done by a mysterious guy in French uniform who arrived at the London Stock Exchange in a royal carriage. And they said, "Don't worry, everyone, Napoleon's dead." Stock market booms, and people are buying stocks and then selling them before people find out that this is a load of bullshit, basically. And Cochrane,
so he shorted the market.
Yeah, in 1814. I didn't really realise this stuff was going on, but Cochrane was framed for this because he had a very long history of disciplinary insolence against superiors. Did not like superiors. I actually read a quote by him. He didn't get on with superiors. He didn't get on with subordinates. He didn't get on with colleagues. It seems like he didn't get on with anyone. Yeah. But he was basically framed for this, was sent to prison, escaped from prison, sent back to prison, and then he was stripped of all of his Royal Navy titles. So then he had to go and fight in South America, in the Chilean and Brazilian, I think, wars of independence in South America as a naval captain, and the failed Greek War of Independence, which I didn't even know about, in the early 19th century. So basically, this guy, when I watched this film, I thought, yeah, come on, they must have Hollywoodized this. You can't have such engaging, clever ideas escaping into the fog. All the stuff that you see in this movie, it can't have been that interesting. I thought that naval combat of this period, and I'm a big reader of naval combat in this period, it's mainly, as Nelson said, damn tactics, get into them as fast as possible. And Cochrane was the exact opposite of this. He captured a Spanish fort by building a load of rafts and putting lanterns on the rafts. So the Spanish thought that there was a huge armada coming towards them, and then they deserted the fort. If anything, this movie actually tones down his career. So that was really interesting for me to learn that, a lot of the stuff in this movie is actually accurate. I mean, it's not literally historically accurate, but it's accurate to the period, the tactics. I love this movie, but I don't like the fact that at the end we get we get individual action. We have to see this boarding party coming on to the Acheron, but we have to get the fact that Aubrey has a hand-to-hand combat. Even the Doctor gets involved in hand-to-hand combat. For one thing that annoys me in this film is the right at the end where we have to see these sort of hero shots of everyone, fighting man-on-man combat. Do you know what I mean? It felt, for me, that ending, I was like...
No. The Doctor needs to be a part of that violent action because that's symbolically his contribution to the ship being the, body politic, as it were. Yeah. He has to be involved.
Okay.
That's the very point of it. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. No, that's the good point. Shall we get on to our wonderful list of questions? I must say, I actually, reading around this subject, I found out something very interesting about Patrick O'Brian, who was a very private individual. And that may have been the fact, although his books are incredibly detailed in their seamanship and nautical details, apparently, according to a venture capitalist... Those trusty guys, a guy called Thomas Perkins. In 1995, he invited Patrick O'Brian for a 2-week cruise on his yacht, as you do, right? As you do. But he said that Patrick O'Brian, although he stated, Patrick O'Brian, that he had naval experience like when he was a kid growing up, he was basically useless on the yacht to the extent of being dangerous. He said, I had to intervene to prevent a full standing jibe, which is some naval thing I don't understand. But my point is here, not to beat up on Patrick O'Brian, he's a wonderful author. My point is here that there was an awful lot of controversy with Patrick O'Brian in the late 90s, early 2000s, because a lot of his private life came out. He changed his name. He married a well-to-do Russian.
I think he took on Irish citizenship, I think, as well. At some stage.
Well, I always, like a lot of people, presumed he was Irish because of his name, but he's not, apparently. But there was a lot of... I was reading about this. I didn't understand this, right? So late 90s, I didn't understand all this controversy about the fact coming out about the fact that he didn't have this naval experience. I mean, who cares? Does anyone care? This is a bit like Pedant's Corner, isn't it? Who cares that this guy doesn't have naval experience if he can write brilliant books?
Absolutely, it's a very similar thing with your man. What's his name? Who writes Hunt for Red October? It was actually
Clancy.
Yes,
Tom Clancy, who I believe is a window salesman. Yeah. But it doesn't matter. He's writing techno thrillers and they're brilliant. Who cares?
Who cares? And they're quite faithful. And I believe this is a very faithful recreation of the period. So my response would be, who cares?
So let's get on to our questions. This is the first ever movie to film on the Galapagos Islands. Just wanted to put that in.
Really?
Yep. And today's trivial trivia. Over 90% of the film takes place on water. What did you think? Too long? Too short? For me, it's perfect. I want to see more. I want to see a sequel to this movie.
Perfect length. I think.
Yeah,
is it
2 hours?
Is it like an hour?
Just over 2 hours.
45 something? It's 2 hours.
2 hours, just over 2 hours.
Yep. Absolutely perfect.
Yeah, I want to see a sequel. Who was your favourite character? Who gave the best performance for you?
Well, I mean, it has to be Russell Crowe, and I'm not sort of like bending the knee to the big Hollywood name here, but it's can I say a commanding performance?
Oh, very good.
Do
you know what I wanted to say, and I forgot at the top of this episode, we get bonus points for doing nautical puns in this, as an homage to the Lesser of Two Weevils joke that's in this movie. I wanted to say,
which was famously in this movie and was recited to me recently in a lecture, a university lecture, by a student who I then threatened to throw out of the room for a bad punning. But it's actually a decent pun. It's nice. The old weevil pun.
Yeah,
not bad.
So just if you're thinking of nautical puns, just let a few ideas sail through your mind, but don't go overboard. So you're going for Crowe for your favourite performance, eh?
I feel that Russell Crowe's performance is, may I deploy another nautical analogy, packed to the gunwales.
Gunnels?
The gunnels, sorry, yes. With
rough charm.
With testosterone and that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. He's the perfect man for this role.
Yeah.
It is macho.
Yeah.
Unapologetically macho.
Yeah, but not. We did Gladiator on this podcast, and you were, you had a great insight.
Because I find Gladiator bleak.
Yeah, that's my point. You had a great insight that there was sort of no humanity or about Gladiator.
Well, I find this movie quite charming. Actually.
Yeah, that's the point I wanted to bring up. That this has a warm kind of glow to it.
As is the Romantic era.
Yeah,
it's charming, boozy. Music, it's
shanties.
It's an alcoholic, isn't he?
Double rations of rum.
Jack Aubrey.
Is he? Yeah, in the books.
Well, he very much in the film, I think, as well.
Is he? I didn't read, but did he?
I think so.
I think so, sir.
I think so, sir.
I think so, sir. I enjoyed Paul Bettany, who I don't really know from much other stuff. He's Stephen Maturin, Bryce, the man who you cannot remember, the Doctor.
This is incredible in this period in terms of they're exploring parts of the world uncharted before. Can you imagine? That sense of endeavour and enlightenment. And it captures that very well.
Yeah.
In the movie.
Well, what I love actually is one of the scenes. We will get back to favourite character in a minute. There's one scene when they arrive in the Galapagos. And Maturin's he's looking through the binoculars or telescope, and he's looking at new species, and he's saying, "Oh look, there's a flightless cormorant," and all of the ordinary seamen are going, "Oh, there's no women on the Galapagos," and Jack Aubrey is still there just looking for naval stuff, and he's like, "Oh, I've seen a bit of wreckage," and then he sees, it kind of encapsulates what everyone's looking for, literally.
Brings sounds a bigger theme here. This is a movie without women, but that is as it was.
Yeah, that is as it was.
That is as it was.
Well, that is as it was.
I've just used very football manager terminology.
Yeah. We go again.
We go again.
Yeah.
The lads got to get their heads down and
let the feet do the
next
talk.
Saturday.
Let the feet do the talking.
Yeah.
Paul Bettany, yes, greatness. What did you think of a good Max Pyrkis, who plays, or Purkis, who plays the the midshipman, the kids, basically the blonde-haired child.
Isn't that good in terms of representing the fact that they are literally children?
Yeah, and there are literally like powder monkeys. The kids who brought the powder to the guns.
Yep.
They're even younger kids than he in that movie.
Faithful to the history,
yeah. Wonderful. I think he does. I mean, I think some of the child acting's a little ropey in parts, and I know you like to pick up on child acting. You're a particular bugbear of you. But my favourite character in this is George Inners as Joe Place, the old fella who gets open head surgery and a coin put in his head, which then turns him basically into like a soothsayer. And he's
a cyborg.
Yeah, but it turns him into like it's a devil ship, I tell ya. There's like this great thing about the Acheron is almost like an ephemeral kind of thing that they can't, I love that about this movie.
But isn't that great? That captures that. That captures the
superstition.
The superstition.
Absolutely.
Of sailors,
yeah. And then you've got the puncturing Enlightenment process of the Doctor. And that's brilliant that they include that stuff.
Who performed surgery on himself.
Yes.
Which male listeners, we've all tried to do some kind of self-surgery at various stages of intoxication or hangover.
Yeah.
But, it's not a good idea. But he gets away with it, the old Doctor, doesn't he?
It reminds me of a scene in Ronin, the underrated De Niro piece, the action film. And he goes, if you don't mind, I'm going to pass out now after the operation. If you don't mind.
I mean,
I'm going to pass out now.
This is a macho movie, right?
Yeah. But not a traditional macho.
Why not? No, because it is a nice portrayal of male friendship. It doesn't have to be constant competition.
Yeah.
It's a nice portrayal of the frustrations, but ultimately the joys of benign male friendship.
Yeah.
It's a lovely thing.
Let's get on to our favourite scene then. Have you got one that you can pick out that you particularly like?
I just like when they start playing fiddle, they start
bit of music
at the end. Well, throughout the thing.
Yeah.
I really like that. I really like the music. And I really like at the end whether it just ends, with them having a jam.
Yeah. There's some great scenes. I love the opening scene when they spot the ship. We're not sure whether they spot the ship in the fog, and then you see those flashes from the cannon, and then all hell breaks loose, and you get this one. This won an Oscar for cinematography, rightly so. As you get some fantastic shots of those like naval action. I have to talk about the lesser of two. We've talked about the lesser of two Weevils scene, which you're fine with.
It's a terrible pun.
Yeah, but they have a recall at the end, so it's kind of I just think it's so weak, that joke. We talked about the arrival in the Galapagos. I love that. And when I love the guy when they board the Acheron finally, and there's I can't remember the name of the guy, the fat lad who's one of the lieutenants, and he goes, "Looks like the job's done, sir," and then he's instantly killed. He's instantly shot in the head.
In many ways, it's an older type movie. It's of that, the cruel sea, 40s, early 50s kind of genre in terms of, in which we serve, etc.
So your favourite scene is when they're playing music, that kind of stuff.
It's the final scene, I think.
Yeah. My favourite is and they realise that the captain's given them the slip. I think that's wonderful. Yeah, great twist. My favourite scene in this movie, and it happens right in the middle, and it's like the turning point of the movie, is when they land. Aubrey decides to land, and it's revealed through Maturin. I don't know how to pronounce that, by the way. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly.
I think it's Maturin.
Maturin. I love it when Aubrey decides to land, and you experience it through Maturin's point of view, that he's on the stretcher and he's being brought in.
Yeah.
And you have this wonderful music playing. Wonderful kind of I don't know what is it. Enlightenment. I was going to say Baroque. I don't know if that's the right period. Classical music. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's beautiful. It's such a beautiful scene. That I think it's just such a wonderful display of humanity, and I think it's gorgeous. I really love that scene. And then later, a few moments later, we get the kind of, he says, I think you've done a favour that I can never repay. And then Aubrey says, name a shrub after me, something prickly and hard to eradicate. It's just wonderful. I think the balance of those two characters.
It's well written.
It's fabulous.
This is a well written piece. Yeah.
Fabulous. So I sometimes do favourite shot, although I have done in the last 2 or 3 episodes. I love the shot of the guy who gets washed overboard and you see him being lost in the sea. And there's a shot as well I really like when it's from way below, right down on the ground, and it's looking up at 2 gunners and they're reloading a cannon. And it's almost like the cannon as a character. It's wonderful. Really like that. If you know the movie inside out, you'll know the shot I mean. So, Bryce, we're getting on to our most important question. Which part should Mel Gibson have played? And or Daniel Day-Lewis and or Marlon Brando? I had a good idea that Beached Whale era Brando could have played Aubrey, and Daniel Day-Lewis could have been Maturin. Can you imagine that lineup?
Yeah, I'd rather not, actually, because I think this is kind of movie which there's sort of unapologetically one leading man here. This is Russell Crowe. And yeah.
Well, do you know what? I was I'll paint the scene for you. As you know, I sent you a picture. I was sitting on the Eurostar Plus.
Eurostar Plus.
Yeah. We haven't managed to get a sponsor yet. Maybe they can sponsor us. And I was going through the tunnel there on the Channel Tunnel between France and England, watching this movie. And as they were serving me my red wine and beluga lentils and salmon, we just always hear these stories from the point of view of the upper classes. We don't get the idea. Basically, these people are in the position because there's a stupid war going on in Europe for the balance of power. Yeah. And I think that's a lot of things that other history podcasts may forget, that this is really a completely unnecessary and stupid conflict where a load of poor people are sent off to kill each other.
Absolutely.
Like a lot of...
Do we need to have all that? I mean,
No, but my point is, let's not forget that. Let's bring it up, because Dan Snow ain't bringing that point up, is he? He's not going to bring up on his podcast the fact that this is a complete waste of time, a waste of everyone's time and effort to be doing these stupid wars of European, the balance of power in Europe.
Look, it's European balance of power. It's in some ways it's sort of Protestantism versus Catholicism in some ways. In other ways, it's just power politics in Europe. But do we need this movie to be reflecting all of that? No, I'm quite happy that in its 2 hours, it is a story of comradeship and... But
that's not my point. My point is, I'm just saying generally that we shouldn't forget that. I just want to make that point because, I think it gets lost.
But I feel it does appeal to, and it does refer to quite conspicuously everything that's going on in Europe, Enlightenment ideals.
Yeah. Okay, so what are we putting in our Hall of Fame? If we could take one movie prop, one historical item, and put it in a museum, what would it be?
When you're around the doctor, when he goes on his trip and he has his little sort of tripod type thing, it's sort of I don't know, sort of like Victorian-y wooden scientific implement. You know what I mean? He's trying to always set it up. That has to go in there.
Oh, and the guy's struggling with all the cages.
Struggling away.
Yeah.
That whatever that is, that massive wooden implement.
Naturist paraphernalia.
Yes.
Is that, have I got that right? Which is the nudie one?
No, he's a naturalist.
Oh, God, that's an honest mistake.
He's not a
he's
not a naturist.
So he's not walking around the Galapagos with his lad out?
He's a naturalist.
Right,
in the sense of like Darwin.
I always get that confused.
He's not a nudist.
It's ruined a lot of holidays. Hmm. So, I've got the guy who's got the hold fast tattoo on his... I'd love to have that tattoo on my knuckles. The hold fast.
Would you really love to have that on your knuckles?
No.
I don't believe you, though.
No, but I thought it was quite a cool thing to put in. Yeah. Or the model of the Acheron that's built unbelievably well out of what looks like Magnum ice lolly sticks. Mm. Or the head surgery coin that turns the old fella there into like some kind of like soothsayer. You know, when I love that fact that he's doing the head surgery and there's "Oh, sir, is them's his brains?" And they're all gathered around and they're all looking in. You know that because that's the point of those. You know, because it harks back to those that time of inviting people into the operating theatre.
Look at his brains, sir.
Yeah, exactly.
Spilling out all over the place like baked beans, sir.
Yeah, exactly. Or the cake, I thought, that the chef makes, the Galapagos Islands cake.
Yeah.
So a sequel, what would happen if there was one? Well, there's like 19 other books. This is basically based on Far Side of the World and with some sequences from Master and Commander.
So we don't have to answer that question.
Well, we don't have to answer it. There's just there's 18 other books you can pilfer from. Best companion film, Bryce. Have you got anything for this?
Well,
it's a tough one.
I was thinking actually when we did Beauty and the Bounty.
Yeah.
Similar period. I even think I referenced that French review earlier.
Yeah.
Tintin. I'm not sort of comparing this to the Spielberg's Tintin movie, but it does have that quality, that sort of adventure.
Yeah, I just think it's terribly underrepresented. Maybe I've just got to come to the realization that this stuff is not that interesting for most movie-going audiences.
One of the reasons is there's no love interest.
Yeah, but the Age of Sail movies, there's not a lot. There's the Hornblower TV series. There's Captain Hornblower from the early 50s with Gregory Peck. That kind of stuff. And there's not much more else. I think that's such a shame. I think this actually... Okay, I know it's a sausage fest, but this lends itself to great drama. Immediate... If you are... Well, answer me this question as a screenwriter. If you've got something like a switch that you can flick on where you've got immediate existential danger, isn't that a brilliant device to have? Like in these naval films, in submarine movies. I know it's very much a sausage party, but it's a great drama to have, isn't it? That you can just flick on.
I think it's very nice in this movie that it is essentially like a body movie.
Yeah.
Uncynically, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's a nice thing to see. There's nothing wrong with that.
Nobel Prize for Movie Physics. How quickly does Maturin amputate Blakeney's arm? That's the child. I don't believe that amputation.
Little Lord.
They call him Lord Blakeney, don't they?
Little Lord, they got to take your little leg off here, Lord. Little Lord, little leg,
But how quickly do they remove the guy's arm? It's too quick for me.
Is his arm or his leg? I can't remember.
His right arm.
Little Blakeney's arm.
Sounding like the king.
Ghastly business. It was a ghastly business. Altogether a ghastly business.
I had to get my right arm amputated. It was
jolly. It was jolly ghastly. Ghastly thing.
What have you got for Sood's Corner? Have you got anything?
Right, yeah, so I returned to...
you perked up a bit now.
Van Badham, writing in The Guardian, says, and I quote...
In your own time.
Master and Commander inherits a cinematic tradition that rewards the achievements of older men with the bodies of younger women. And I thought to myself, there's actually just no women in this. So, feminist...
I'm just trying to take a minute to... I'm genuinely trying to
feminist critique,
work out what that means.
Feminist critique accepted.
Yeah.
To be fair, it inherits a tradition.
Okay, right.
She doesn't like it because it's just men,
right?
And it's a body movie, and you've got this is a militant feminist opinion, and she's just unhappy that there's no women in it, and but let's be really honest here. The Royal Navy,
not a lot of women.
There weren't a lot of them, no. And so there you go.
Pedant's Corner.
Go on.
I've got a good one here for you. But one of the things I notice, Russell Crowe's, and I feel a bit bad because I noticed as a violin player myself, Russell Crowe's violin playing. There's a point at which it obviously what he's playing doesn't make sense with the music that's overlaid.
Don't care.
Well, that's a good point. But then I read...
I don't care. It's a nice jig.
Yeah, I know, but then
care.
Yeah, okay. But then I read that he learned violin for 3 months, studied it, and said it was the most difficult thing he's done as an actor, to try and learn the violin for this part. Right. So for me to sit here and criticise the fact that his violin playing visually, because he's in the third position at one point, doesn't add up to what's being played, would just be pedantry, Bryce.
It'd be sheer pedantry.
Yeah, it would
wouldn't it?
Yeah. I've got another one for you. Okay. This is a good one. Factual error. At the end of the film, Aubrey sends the demastered prize Acheron to Valparaiso, Chile for repairs. Valparaiso is 3,000 miles from the Galapagos Islands, and in 1805 was a tiny village without appropriate port facilities to dock, let alone to repair anything as large as a frigate. Guayaquil, and it goes on, Guayaquil, I think you pronounce it.
Guayaquil, yeah.
Guayaquil, in modern Ecuador, would have been a more appropriate choice. Being about 750 miles from the Galapagos, and being a major port in 1805. Then, the author pedants himself and says, the choice between the two ports is moot anyway, since both municipalities were Spanish territory in 1805, and thus were allied with the French and hostile to the British. So not only has this person written a criticism, he's criticised his own criticism halfway through writing it, which I very much appreciated.
Well, I'm just looking up Guayaquil, live.
To,
sorry,
check the weather,
that's on the other side of, as is Ecuador, on the other side of the,
but
American
it's only 750 miles from the Galapagos, I've got. Unless he's f***ed up twice. And he's got that wrong as well. I don't know.
Yeah, Galapagos. Yeah. Okay, well, yeah, I know I can see that. Just like what?
It's a throwaway line, isn't it?
What's wrong with your life,
Mr. Hodgkins? Take this to Valparaiso, if you please.
Well, Valparaiso is a well-established port.
Yeah, that people would have heard
historically,
of.
culturally, and romantically.
Yeah.
I think that is as you described it, pedantry.
Yeah, I think we've probably spent longer on this point than he did, or he or she. But for some reason, I have a feeling it might be a he who's written that.
Do you reckon?
So that brings us on to our summary of the film. Our marks out of 10. What did you give Master and Commander, Bryce? What was your overall feeling of this film? What did you give it out of 10?
I really like this movie. It's unusual in the term, in the time that it's brought out, and that's probably what it suffered, I think, at the box office. This is, I think, very faithful and quite authentic portrayal of, a ship of the line at that time, and what motivated those men, and for all those reasons, I would give it a 9 out of 10.
That's what I've given it. Yep. And the only reason. This is going to sound like pedantry as well. Honestly, the only reason I haven't gone higher, I think that's the highest I've ever been on this podcast, 9. I think I've given a few other films 9. But I just honestly have a problem with that ends. I know you don't. You like it, but the end scene when they all have a fight on the ship. Well, and it has to go back to individual combat. No, we've got to have the Doctor having a fight.
It ends. They play music and.
No, but I mean before that. So when the
penultimate.
Yeah, when they're on the ship and they have to have. This superhero one-on-one combat. That just really
they are at sea, confined in really small quarters for a long time. Of course, you're going to twat each other.
You're just absolutely dying for a Barney, basically.
But yeah. I mean, it's a great. You know what? This is a great movie. It's unapologetically male, fun. Adventure movie. It's not of its time. You know what I mean? This is not
2003.
Of its time. Yeah. I don't think it's of its time.
Yeah.
I think that's probably why it suffered. Consequently, it should be better regarded.
Yeah,
it's a really good movie.
It's one of those movies lost to time.
This is an endearing movie. Yes, it's male.
Yeah, you said that about 8 times during this podcast.
Well, of course it is. But that's an important point. That's probably why it suffers, because it is just male.
Yeah.
But that was the reality.
Yeah.
There's no two ways about that.
Yeah. No, I think it's right, and I think basically the reason why I would give this such a high score is because it does such a good job of encompassing. You got an action film that encompasses the time period so wonderfully. and it's done with fantastic performances, wonderful direction, fantastic cinematography. I just wanted to mention, actually, before we close, that this was nominated, I think, for 10 Oscars, this movie. 10 Oscars.
Faster, Mr. Mate!
If you please.
If you please.
10 Oscars, if you please. Yeah, but, of course,
Splice the main brace!
it was wiped out at the Oscars that year by Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. Which will annoy you as a non-fantasy fan. I'm also not a big fan.
I like realism.
No, I'm not a fan. Yeah, me too.
I like realism.
That's why we do this podcast. I'm not a fantasy fan either. I do like Lord of the Rings, though. But it was completely wiped out by that movie, Lord of the Rings, which won all of the categories it was nominated in, and basically relegated this movie to just 2 Oscar wins for cinematography and sound.
But at least you got a couple.
Yeah, but, Lord of the Rings, the Return of the King, okay, I'm talking to you, listeners out there who are Lord of the Rings fans. That's not the best Lord of the Rings movie. It isn't. I think the first 2 are better, and it just got the awards because it was the last one of the trilogy.
Splice the main brace, Mr. Mate.
Exactly. So this movie should have performed better at the box office, should be better regarded, and it's great that we're throwing some light on it now, or have done.
We like this movie.
We like it a lot, sir, if you please, sir. So, Bryce, thank you very much for joining me. If you're listening on YouTube, leave us a comment what you think about this movie. And if you want to email us, have a look at the show notes. Our email address is in the description. And we'll see you on the next episode of Historical Movies Podcast. That's it for this episode of the Historical Movies Podcast. Don't forget to leave us a review on your chosen podcast platform. Spotify and Apple Podcasts make a huge difference to the algorithm. And if you're on YouTube, don't forget to leave a comment or a like or subscribe. Thanks very much for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.